Hi, I'm Randall from Randall's ESL Cyber Listening Lab, providing tips on language learning, culture, and human development. And today's broadcast is going to be I Need Help Tips for Making the Most of Your Online Classes. And I think what teachers are finding is that during this particular unique period where we find ourselves with more and more classes being held online, I think teachers and students are trying to figure out of how to make the most of online classes. And I'm not just speaking of teachers, but students as well. And I think for teachers, I think they're trying to figure out how to make their classes more engaging because sometimes students seem zoned out or bored or just turn off their cameras. And that said, I think teachers need to be fully aware of the complexities of the situation, working with different ages, different learning styles, students with actually different learning needs, even for students with special needs as well, different situations, different cultures, and different laws that govern the use of online cameras and so forth. And all of these, I think, influence how we achieve an engaging language learning environment. At the same time, I think students, often I hear students complaining, saying that they're tired of teachers just lecturing on and on and on. And then teachers lament the fact that, wait, why aren't you participating more actively? Why do you have your cameras turned off? So I think perhaps what is happening is that teachers, students, and parents are often looking past each other on the particular topic. And I think if teachers and students and parents are more aware of how we can make the online learning more effective and more engaging, I think that is what we're trying to accomplish in this particular broadcast. Throughout the broadcast, I'm inviting teachers and students to share their perspectives on this particular topic. So let's just go ahead and get a preview of what I'd like to talk about today. And I encourage teachers to be sharing. I'd like to talk about setting realistic goals for online learning. The next topic is planning out the technical logistics and testing and testing and testing beforehand. We'll talk about developing an online routine to make your classes go a lot smoother, establishing classroom expectations and goals for these online learning environments, emphasizing in classroom engagement. How do you make the classroom engaging more and more? And then I'll talk about considering a flipped instructional model and then implementing a virtual reward system. And one of the things that I like to try to do as we go throughout this broadcast is emphasizing that we're working with students. I know out there people are working with students of all ages. And so I'm trying to keep that in mind as well during today's broadcast. And again, feel free to share your comments about any of these topics throughout the broadcast. Well, first of all, what I'd like to jump in and talk a little bit about what has been, and I want you to be honest, what has been your experience in either teaching online since the beginning of the pandemic, especially, and as a language learner? And I think for many people, it's been like this, is that, wow, people have told me, teach online, just use Zoom or, Microsoft Teams, use this and this and this. But I think what many teachers have experienced is something like this, is that, everything they're experiencing is like they're tripping over themselves. Things are not working exactly the way they planned. Sometimes maybe school administrators are saying, just use the technology. Students know how to use it, but maybe they're talking about or giving overly simplistic examples of how technology is used. And maybe it's just been a lot more difficult than we've anticipated. But one of the things I find is that teachers' minds are under construction. I find that teachers have been very, very resilient, very chameleonic, like a chameleon that is able to change its color based on the situation. But I don't think teachers have found that this has been a very easy transition to online learning. And I think teachers have found that to be the same. Uh, just checking in with some other comments. Mesa says, I think smart teachers should keep a sense of humor every now and then in their classes. Absolutely, especially when you make mistakes. They should call students to make sure they are all attendees. They can also ask them to surf the web for more information about the topic discussed. So those are great ideas, and we're going to be talking about those. So let's go ahead and I'm going to be talking about implementing a reward system, but I want to start out with just a simple thought. Make sure that you set realistic goals for your online classes. And one of the things that I found is that whether it be governments, whether it be schools, whether it be teachers, everyone's trying to fill the gap, fill the need, but sometimes we have to realize what are the possibilities actually with students in online learning. And one of the things that I've shared before with you in a previous broadcast is, we need to set realistic goals for our classes. And we have to keep in mind that some of our students are in high resource environments where they have, lots of technology, high speed internet connections. But there are other situations where just coming up with a reliable internet connection is just so difficult. And one of the things that I've shared for you, I would like to be able to do this and this and this with my online classes. But I realize that it's not always possible, especially when you have students that are coming to your online classes, not just from inside your country, but students might be attending a class and they might be participating from around the world. In my particular case, as I work at the University of Utah, I have students that are taking the class right from Utah in the United States. But I have students from Asia, from Korea and Japan that are joining the class at, midnight or 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. And it's just really difficult. So even though I would love to be able to do this, now I'm not very tall. I would love to be able to dunk the basketball. I would love to be able to do this as well. The reality is doing such uh, aerial moves for basketball is just impossible. And so I think that we have to keep that in mind as well when we're talking about technology, is being realistic about what you can do, especially if you have large classes. It's just, I guess what I'm trying to say is keep things realistic in everything you do, because some things are just out of your control. Cassie, I think that, Cassia, please let us know where you're writing from. It's a challenge to teach online. Sometimes the students close the camera. I'm gonna talk about that in a minute. But they like when we discuss about a video. Greetings from Brazil. Thank you for letting me know. Thanks for sharing your comments and experiences with us. And we're going to be talking just about those cameras and what we can do in those particular cases. So the next point I'd like to talk about is plan out the technical logistics beforehand and test and test and test and test some more. What I mean by that is sometimes as you're planning out, and again, I know there are teachers that are probably using different platforms to teach their classes. It might be a proprietary system that their school uses and so forth, but keep in mind, number one, the learning ages and needs of styles of students. And the other thing would be, as we talk right now, there are many different language learning platforms or video conferencing platforms that can be used. Zoom, Microsoft Teams, many people use Skype and GoMeeting. And so you have to be able to think, okay, what is available to my students? Thinking of the logistics of internet connection speeds and so forth, I think are really critical. One of the platforms that I use, the main platform, is Zoom. And some of the things that I'm going to talk about right now, and Cassia mentioned about cameras, is I'd like to focus on using Zoom, but realizing these same principles, whether you're using Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Skype and so forth, the ideas that I'm sharing could be applicable to a number of different situations. And so as we talk about this, planning out the technical logistics please share your experiences, the challenges, and what things have worked. So first of all, let's go ahead and get into these technical things. And the first thing is video conferencing. I think the staple of many online classes is some type of video conferencing platform. Here are, you can see some examples that I've used in the swap shops with teachers from around the world. And as we do this, we have to think about some of these logistics. And what you need to be thinking about is determining online accessibility for all. In other words, are your students actually able to access the platform that you're using? The time of day, for example. And as I'm talking about this as well, I want to keep in mind, and as I talk about online accessibility, I want to be reminded of the idea that some of your students might be at home, there might be one computer, and there might be 3, 5 people wrestling to use the computer at the same time. They might find that, well, maybe they're not able to participate live because of the logistical challenges that they're fighting over a computer with 2 or 3 other people in the family. And we should keep that in mind as well. So keeping these thoughts in mind, and again, feel free to share your ideas. I want to talk a little bit about Zoom. But as I talk about Zoom, as I'm thinking about teaching online classes and whether you're using Zoom or other platforms, I think the ideas that I'm sharing would be applicable to all. So first of all, as you're teaching an online class, and again, as I showed you a little bit about Zoom, again, seeing video conferencing here, is number one, you want to check your audio settings. And what I say by audio settings is not only the speaker that you can be able to hear the students, but also your microphone. And if you look right in the middle of the screen right there, and let me just go back here, it says test microphone, and it says within Zoom, right in the middle of the screen, it says suppress background noise. In other words, if you're, for example, giving an online class and someone outside is, using some type of machinery, cutting the lawn, or just making noise in the other room next to you, you can actually control the amount of sound, background sound, that is being suppressed, high, low, or medium. And many teachers are not even aware of this feature, that they have the ability to control any background noise. That could be even your keyboard as you're typing something in, and that could be something to keep in mind as well. Ahmed from Egypt says, I think offline video is sometimes helpful in case there are many people using the same computer. Great idea about offline video. So maybe not relying on online video completely. And I'm going to come back and talk about the flipped classroom, where students can access video in preparation for your class versus trying to stream video in your live classroom. So the first thing is about audio, making some audio adjustments. Hefte says, and again from Brazil, I'm not always sure how to pronounce your name, Hefte. We have to have realistic goals in life, actually, with focus on things which depend on us, things we can control. In this case of learning English, well, this is a thing we can control and depends on us. So again, as a language learner, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that comment from Brazil. So in addition to the audio settings, what you want to keep in mind is within Zoom, and I'm sure of any platform you're looking at, there's always going to be some hidden settings that maybe you're not aware of. And this happens to be within Zoom under settings, which I'm going to show you right now. So in addition to audio, you want to think about video as well. Now, one of the things that was mentioned, a comment that was just right at the beginning of the broadcast, is what about students that are turning on and off their camera? Well, number one, you want to make sure that you give students a reason to turn on their camera. I have kids that are children that are studying at the university, and sometimes their teachers lecture on and on and on and on. But the teacher wants them to keep on their camera. And really, in that particular case, to me, there's no reason to have on your camera. But one of the things that I suggest, and as you see on the screen, minimize sensory overload. There can be, and I think this is important for teachers to remember, there can be students that are just overloaded by the visual elements of seeing so much on their screen or being seen. There can be that case where the students, not only it's a matter of feeling anxious or feeling a little anxiety, but sometimes being seen by others can be sensory overload. And so I want people to keep that in mind. But one of the things that I often find is that you might consider a couple of features in whatever platform you're using in Zoom, maybe muting participants as they enter, because sometimes there's a lot of confusion and noise going on. Maybe you could turn that on or off. Currently have that off. Or what you can do is with participants is by default, decide whether you want their cameras on or off when they start participating in the video. Now, as teachers, imagine yourself that you're running around, you're trying to get things ready. And so maybe you want your video and audio turned off right at the beginning, but that's just something to consider. Maybe turning muting all of the students as they come in so that you don't hear a multiplicity of voices. But that, of course, depends on your goals as well. The next idea is hiding non-participants. I don't know if you've ever been in a Zoom meeting. Let's say you have a class of 15, 20, 30, and like only 10 students have their cameras on. So many students will have their cameras off, and you don't know if they're actually there or they went out to get a sandwich or they're shopping now. You really don't know. And so sometimes for some learners, seeing just the names of people is a visual distraction. Some teachers like it because they can see who is present. But once you take roll or whatever, you might consider saying, well, do I really want to have those that only have their names, visible? And so what some teachers will do actually is, especially in classes where you're encouraging participation, but some people are not, what you can do is you can just turn off. You see on my screen, it says Andrew Jones. You can just turn those students off. They're still in the classroom. They still can participate, but you're focusing perhaps on those that are really and truly engaging. And so what you can do is you can click on the video button in Zoom, and then looking at the settings, you can say select hide non-video participants. Again, this might be a feature that you might consider. Of course, you in a listening speaking class or in a language class, you're hoping everyone will participate. But there might be cases where, hey, I'm just going to be focusing on those that are actually participating. It can be a distraction of just seeing people's names. It's just something to consider for you. Again, feel free to be sharing in this broadcast of any tips or tricks that you have found useful in using Zoom or any other platform that you've tried to use. In addition to this, one of the things is that I encourage is students, and by default, one of the things, and these are hidden features within Zoom, sometimes you want to determine whether you're going to allow for in-class feedback where students can give a thumbs up. If you're saying, hey, how many of you understand, or what do you think about this idea, that students can actually give some type of emoji to share, to participate. This could be useful in large classes and so forth, allowing that. And one of the other things that I think is a hidden feature about emojis is that many people are either using the web browser of Zoom, or for computers, you have the actual client. It's the actual software that you install on the computer. And you can actually, a small thing, but you can actually change, as you can see on the screen, and let me make that just a little bit bigger, the actual skin tone. Some people don't like to, always be seen as a yellow thumbs up. So you can go in, not the web browser platform, but actually the client, the software that you download, can be a way of adjusting the skin tone. But the idea of allowing emojis for in-class feedback, I think, can be really useful. Elena says, I can't stay connected now. Will you be able to see it later? Absolutely. All of my broadcasts are recorded, so you can come back and watch that on Facebook or on YouTube. So again, we're talking about these different ideas related to this technology of how to plan things out. Let me talk about a couple more ideas. The other thing, let's say as a teacher, this is kind of a small feature, may or may not be interested in this, but when you go into the video settings, there is actually something called touch up my appearance. And why would that be important? Well, for me, for example, again, on the left, you see untouched. On the right, you see touched up. You can see that it looks like, wow, it kind of touches up your face. Imagine, for example, you haven't had time to shave or whatever. It kind of touches it up, and you can adjust the lighting. So that's kind of a simple feature, but still, I think useful to making your own appearance nice as well. The other idea would be with chat. Turning on the chat feature. And this is what you want to consider, I think, carefully as a teacher in managing your classes. Number one, will you allow engagement, allowing people to chat back and forth? I think, number one, that can be really useful. Like right now, like a chat feature, I'm allowing you to share your comments through Facebook, can be extremely useful if you don't want to interrupt speakers throughout it. But what you want to consider is about that private chat. Do you want students to privately chat? I generally have that turned off. But again, having that chat feature on, I think, is very, very useful. So we see, so I think that a lot of these comments, I think, are very useful as well. Let's see what else we have here. Another thing is that I think is a feature that is underutilized is the poll feature. In other words, for example, if you ask students, how many of you do not understand? Well, you're not going to get anyone who says they don't understand. And so one of the unique features is within many platforms, including Zoom, is the ability to create polls. So you can create polls in advance. And then what you can do is, again, these are under the settings, and then you can create any type of poll. For example, do you understand the class so far? Or do you want me to give some additional examples? And this allows, and you can determine whether these answers are anonymous or you're able to see who responds to them. This is a great feature to allow students to engage in the class, especially in large classes or where you're trying to get immediate feedback from students using polls. And I would be interested, have any of you used polls? How have you used Zoom in different ways? The next thing I think many people are aware of is the virtual background, excuse me, where you can actually use a background. Let's say that you're worried about the clutter behind you. You want to create and add virtual backgrounds. And within Zoom, it has a whole collection of virtual backgrounds that you can use. And I'm going to talk about another underutilized feature, not with backgrounds, but similar, that I think creates some additional engagement in a few minutes. So those are some of the thoughts that I think in using Zoom to actually manage some of the classroom just a little bit better. Carolina says the poll feature comes in handy when with exit tickets. Thank you for talking about it. And when Carolina is talking about an exit ticket, that is, if I understand you, Carolina, is at the very end of class. You just want to do a quick assessment. Hey, everyone, how well have you understood today's lesson? Perfectly, somewhat. I need some more review. So creating those exit texts, I think, are really important in whatever we do. So let's go ahead and look at some other comments that on these particular topics. So we've talked about these ideas. Thank you, Carolina, for sharing some of those comments as well. And let's go on to the next part of what we're talking about today is creating and developing an online routine. I think this is really critical for any classroom, in the sense that whether you're working with younger learners or adult learners and so forth, so they're able to see what you're trying to accomplish throughout your lesson, and they're able to follow along with what you're trying to share. So some ideas could be opening greetings. Maybe you have some type of warm-up activity where people express how they're doing in today's class. The other idea is maybe today's weather forecast. I know when I was learning Spanish, sometimes there were situations where students talked about, what is the weather today? You could assign student to be responsible for that. What is today's date? What is the weather today? And so forth. Maybe a quote for the day could be something like that you share, or maybe some type of 5-minute warm-up discussion topic. So creating some type of routine, I think, is really critical for anything you do. What I usually do is I go over the daily plan and the weekly plan, so students kind of see what we're trying to accomplish today and what we're trying to accomplish over the next idea. And then Carolina says, yeah, that's it about that exit ticket. Also, Casilla says, we have been using Google Meet. Great. And Casilla, if you could share by chance how you've used Google Meet, perhaps how it compares to other platforms, please feel free to share. And I would be interested right now, how have you developed, any of you, a classroom daily routine? What does that look like? What pattern do you use to help students in your particular class? I think those are really key. One of the Casilla says, sometimes I send the video before the class and after we discuss about video during class. Thank you, Casilla, for sharing that, because that's one idea I'm going to be sharing about in a minute, about flipping, in a way, flipping the classroom and presenting certain things offline. In other words, encouraging students to look at something offline so that you can focus on other activities during the class. And I think that helps facilitate a lot of different tasks. And we're going to be looking at that in a couple of minutes. So thank you for sharing that. All right. So the next idea, what I'd like to talk about in addition, is talking a little bit about, let me make sure where I am, is talking a little bit about establishing expectations and class rules. And this is where I'm really interested in relying on some of your ideas for how to do this as well. One of the things that I want to talk about, and let me go back. Let me just step back because I forgot something. And if I don't mention it right now, I'm going to forget it. One of the hardest things about teaching online classes is looking at your video camera and not at your screen. And so one of the things that happens is you'll notice throughout the broadcast that I'm trying to look at you like at the students, but there's so much going on where I'm trying to moderate comments. I'm trying to look at my plan for the particular broadcast. And so even when you're using Skype or you're using whatever platform, Zoom and Microsoft Teams, is the more that you actually look at the camera, I think you connect better with your audience. It's a small thing. You'll see me looking up and down because I'm trying to control several things on my screen. But I think just keeping your eyes on your camera as much as possible creates that engagement with students, that human connection that I think is so important. So what I'd like to talk about now is establishing classroom expectations and rules. And this is where I really hope that we have some participation today, because I'm really interested in what you do. And I'm going to be sharing some of my ideas as well. Let's see here. Oh, Carolina says, such a wonderful way to prepare them. Yes, with pre-material, pre-class material like video and so forth. Another thing is, Carlos said, good point. Keep an eye contact with the students. Now, you're just noticing me as I'm reading the comments, I'm looking down. But as much as you can, look at the camera. I mean, you're not looking at their faces on the screen per se, but when you look at the camera, you look more engaged. And I think that's what everyone is trying to say here as well. So let's take a look at some of the classroom rules that you might consider. And these might be things that you will determine depending on the level, the age, your needs, and so forth. Number one, managing language. Is there any particular rule that you might have about language that you expect or that you find appropriate in the class? And this might be something that you do in your regular classes, but you might consider this also online, is managing language. And before I forget, depending on the level of your students, sometimes what I find is that if you're working with older learners, let's say, high school and above, what you can do is within Zoom, number one, helping them understand the expectations, because in reality, the class is not your class, it's their class. So sometimes what I do is I use the breakout rooms feature. I begin at the beginning of the class, yes, keeping in mind that I already have certain expectations and rules, but I have them in small groups, meet together for a few minutes about the rules and expectations they have, and then bring them back into the class. And I think when students feel that they have ownership over some of what takes place in the class, I think you'll gain greater buy-in to your whole classroom experience. The other thing is with distractions, whether you're asking students to turn on or off their cameras, sometimes having students turn off their cameras can be a frustration for teachers. But I'm also interested in any teachers out there in different parts of the world where there are laws, whether they are policies that govern the use of cameras for minor children. Are there certain rules that dictate that they have to keep them off? Sometimes we would like students to have their cameras on, but maybe we're not allowed to. And I'd be interested in hearing any of you that are involved in that. So distractions, cell phones, a TV, a barking dog. Sometimes you can't control some of these things, but sometimes you can. The other thing is about questions. How do you anticipate students asking questions? Are you going to allow them to have that chat feature opened? Is it open mic for that? Can they raise their hands and so forth? I think having those expectations, I think, are important as well. And that's where you can use in certain video conferencing platforms like Zoom, have an emoticon or emoji that you can raise your hand so that students can see. You can see that students have a question. The other thing is might be dress code. I don't know if any teachers would expect students to be, I don't know, sometimes people might, in the visual, what they're wearing right now, I have no shoes on. I'm wearing shorts, but I do have a tie on. It just depends on what the expectations. Do you mind if students are in their pajamas or not? Do you mind if they're outside under a tree watching your, class? You might have some certain expectations for the class. Again, feel free to share any of those expectations you would anticipate as well. The next item that I would like to talk about is a little bit about emphasizing engagement. And when I talk about engagement, this might depend on, again, the students that you're working with, but sometimes using props, pictures, polls, shared documents, music and song. So for example, if you're working with younger learners and you're teaching animals, maybe you have a giraffe and maybe you have a cow, right? And maybe you have a big lizard or something like that, or an elephant. And one of the simple activities that you can use with props is if you're working with younger learners, you can, for example, have a vocabulary chain building activity where you say, okay, what animals did you see last week? And the first student says, I saw, and you could be using props, an elephant. And the next student says, I saw an elephant and a cow. And the next students can say, I found an elephant and a giraffe and a cow. And you can build upon it. So using some type of props, I think, is really important, not just for younger learners, but all learners. You might have different books that you use. You could read a book to students. I think that can be a really engaging activity. But if you're talking about older learners, one of the things that I use in Zoom is breakout rooms. And right now I'm working with a group of students at the University of Utah, and they are preparing for debates. And so what they can do in breakout rooms, they used shared documents with Google. If you have a Google account, you can open up and create a shared document. And so as the students in breakout rooms are preparing for a debate and they're sharing ideas, one student can open up in breakout room, can open up the document and be typing in other ideas that students are sharing as part of a shared project. So using Google Docs, I think, is important, and maybe music and song. So if any of you are using other things that to increase engagement, please share. One of the things that I like, you can find these online. One website, I think if you type in online stopwatch, it is a website where you have name pickers. So let's say that you have a group of students online and you're trying to choose partners or who goes first. You have these online name pickers that can be a real useful tool as well. So again, coming up with props, things like that. And what I also encourage, especially when you're working with younger learners, keep things simple. Short blocks, I think, is really important, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, things like that, to not overwhelm the learners. Couple of ideas. Hi, Mona. Again, Mona from Tunisia, welcome as well. And Carolina says, yes, breakout rooms are wonderful for speaking too. And the great thing about breakout rooms is, again, and you got to, one of the things that I find is anytime teachers say, I can't keep my students engaged, you have to be thinking, what are you doing that gives them a reason to engage? And as Carolina just mentioned, if you have a class of 20, 25 students, creating tasks, we're breaking students up into smaller groups, I think is really important. Because if you have a listening speaking class and you're expecting students to remain focused on you for 45 minutes or whatever, it's not happening. Because students find that type of engagement very minimal. And I think what you need to do is really find ways of engaging them. Hello, Ronald. And again, feel free to join in, make any comments. And right now we're talking about, the focus is on different types of emphasizing engagement in online classes. So as I mentioned, using different props, different pictures, using polls, as we talked about a few minutes ago, I think is a wonderful way of creating engagement and keeping those chunks, I think, concise. One of the things Cassia mentioned right at the beginning, and this is the next thing I'd like to talk about, is dealing with considering a flipped instructional model. And I think this becomes really, really important with online learning. In other words, I think teachers are doing this in traditional classrooms. For example, they ask students, well, tonight here, I want you to go to this website. I want you to watch this video. Or tonight, I want you to do this reading and come prepared for the classroom. So in other words, instead of watching a video in the classroom, instead of doing a reading in the classroom, what we can do is flip it around and have the student watch the video at home or listen to a passage at home and reserve the classroom period for this increased engagement. Now, I think, in Cassia, please help me if this is what you're thinking of as well. Sometimes if you have a class of 20 people and you're trying to show a video during the class, it can be very problematic, especially when you're dealing with students in a low resource environment who are trying to watch, your online video. And we always have to remember that for some students, watching online video, especially when you're trying to push it through your online video conferencing software, is like trying to drink molasses through a small straw. You just can't. In other words, it's really hard to push out video in such situations. So instead of having students watch video and other things beforehand, and Lamia, thank you, Lamia. Thank you for this. This is very important. Please share where you're from as well. Let me give you some examples of this flipped instructional model. One of the things that I have been experimenting with, number one, is puppetry. And this goes back to engagement. At the University of Utah, I have a colleague, Russ Wilson, and he and I have been creating these very short instructional videos. And so maybe instead of using, like different types of props, you can create puppetry. Or having recently, in watching the presidential debate, I had students not spending 96 minutes in a Zoom class watching that, but I had them watch that beforehand and then spent the class discussing it. Or, for example, episode 14, I was talking about the hardest day of my life. That was an example of having students watch something, read something, listen to something before they come to the class. And I think that allows you more time in the class to focus on your specific needs, especially keeping an idea in mind that, well, students are struggling on, with low bandwidth connections that really can't handle 20 students and you doing a video at the same time. So flipped classroom, having students do things beforehand, video, audio, recording, reading, and then you spend the time in class on discussing it. The next thing I want to share with you, and this is one of the last ideas, is I want to talk about implementing a reward system. In other words, especially if you're dealing with younger learners and you're trying to keep them engaged. I've heard from many teachers, I have 20 students and I lose them after 5 minutes. Well, maybe coming up with a reward system might just help in some situations. And any one of these that I'm going to show you, we could spend a whole broadcast on each one of these. But let me suggest show and tell. Let's say that you're working with younger learners. Show and tell means that maybe you designate one student or two students to come to the next Zoom class and maybe introduce their pet or show their favorite toy or something like that. Okay, that can be one way of doing a reward system. In other words, if you remain focused, if everyone works hard today, we're allowed 2 students to do a virtual show and tell. It could be with your pet. Again, it could be with your favorite doll. In the background, you see Woody and Buzz Lightyear. Maybe students want to share. Those can be ideas as well. The next thing is a virtual field trip. If you type online virtual field trips, you're going to come up with a lot of different videos or ideas where instead of the grammar lesson for today of the simple past tense, or we're talking about animals like my pig or like my, sheep or something like that, maybe you actually will show them a series of pictures or a video that actually is like, well, we can't go to the beach. We can't go to Paris. We can't go here and there, but you can actually show a video which creates a virtual field trip. And I think field trips are really exciting. I always liked real field trips when I was growing up. Those can be exciting as well. Story time. It could be something, okay, everyone, you've been great today. Let me share with you one of my favorite books, and it's called Bears in the Night. This is the book that I read to my children, and this is the book that we read to our grandson. So maybe it is a story time. Or dress up day. Maybe you have, hey, everyone, tomorrow we're going to have a dress up day, wear your favorite pajamas, wear your your favorite tie. Like this is my favorite tie right there. If you can see it, Beatles, favorite tie. You could also have a talent show that I think is really important. Show your talent as well. And let me share with you one last feature, and then we're going to go to some comments because I see a number of comments coming in. One of the real cool features of Zoom, which fewer teachers know about, is dealing with video filters. In other words, you have virtual backgrounds, but you also have video filters where you could add, like for example, you see one where I'm wearing a pirate's hat, and a pirate's hat and a patch. And as you move, that actually Zoom will actually allow has its own technology, and that keeps that right in position. Or like a mask, I'm not really wearing a mask. It is a video filter, and you have all of these video filters that you can turn on or off. And so maybe with your students, you could say, hey, everyone, use a video filter tomorrow that represents you. So these video filters just add a new dimension. You could, role play. You could create all kinds of scenarios. And so those video filters, I think, are a really cool feature that is added with Zoom. Let's take a look at some final comments. Cassia says, watching before the class could help them to understand better the context or even recognize the vocabulary that they're going to learn. Absolutely. So that's a great, really tip. Mona says, reward systems work for teenagers as well. And I would be interested. Yes, I don't think this is just limited to children, but yes, reward systems. And I think reward systems work with teachers as well. Also, Ricardo says, greetings from Monterrey, Mexico. Welcome again. Great to use that. And then we can create Padlet, in which we put the outstanding work of students. Thank you, Mona, for bringing that up. There is another online service. It's called Padlet. It's kind of like a virtual graffiti wall where you can add all kinds of things to that. And I think that's an excellent idea as well. So basically, throughout today, we've talked about a number of things. We've talked about setting realistic goals, what can really be accomplished with technology. I talked about planning out your logistics beforehand and test. And then I went over a whole series of features in Zoom, but I'm assuming in Microsoft Teams and other platforms, they have that to make your videos shine, to allow and provide better engagement. I talked about devising some type of classroom routine where students know what to expect every day at the beginning, establishing classroom expectations and rules. And as I also mentioned, I think one of the important things in doing that is to get students involved so they feel ownership over what you're doing. I talked about emphasizing engagement. And that could be in any way: props, pictures, polls, pictures, again, Woody in the background, anything that can increase engagement. We talked about flipped instructional model. And one of the things I don't think I showed, let me see if I go back here. Let me actually show this picture. One of my favorite books is this. It's called Blended: Using Disruptive Innovation to Improve Schools. And it goes through all kinds of different models that could be used for new types of engagement around the world. And I think those are the things that are so important for classroom. So as I wrap up today, I want to thank you for being a part of this broadcast. It's always exciting to be involved with teachers around the world. I just mentioned, if you're interested in participating in the next swap shop, the next swap shop is on October 24th. Feel free to contact me regarding that. You can come as an observer. You can come as a participant. I think that's really gives teachers voices and opportunities to share in so many ways. And again, we see Jose. Hi, Randall. Thank you. And Mona as well. Thank you very much. As always, as we wrap up this particular broadcast, I just want to share with you, thank you so much for being a part of this vibrant online community where teachers from around the world can share. Feel free to let me know if you would be interested in being a part of a broadcast as well, because certainly it's your voice that really moves our classes and our world. So signing off from now, again, have a great day and an even better tomorrow.